Setting up a persistent SSH tunnel is really fairly simple. You can put it in a repeating loop. However, one of the best ways to make sure that it stays connected and stays persistent is with a third-party program called autossh. What's great about autossh is it has robust network checks. Basically, you specify a port that it sends information back and forth constantly, and if for some reason it detects a split in the connection that's going between them, it will kill off an SSH session and start a new one. So it's really good at making sure that your connection is solid, even if something gets disconnected in between. So let's say that there's a fiber split and you're disconnected. Well, it's going to keep trying to reconnect rather than just hanging due to lack of communication. Now, it does still require that you use key pairs to log in because you don't want to have to authenticate every time that you use autossh. Usually it's something you put in your startup scripts. And it's not usually installed on the distribution by default, but it's usually like in the universe repository for Ubuntu. It's usually easy to install, but it's usually not there by default. However, it's worth installing because it's very robust and it's a great way to keep a tunnel open. So let's see how to work it. It's very similar to SSH in and of itself, but again, it's more robust. Now on my lab system here, CentOS machine right here is running a web server on port 80. So if we wanted to tunnel into that, we would just say something like SSH-L 8000 localhost port 80. I'm going to do -N so I get a non-interactive shell to CentOS. Press enter, so we get nothing, but if we look and try to load localhost port 80, sure enough, it works. But the problem comes when something happens to the SSH connection and it gets killed. So you'll see over here, it closed, so now it's not working. Now we could do a bash loop in order to keep restarting it, but there's another program called autossh, which is that program we talked about that uses monitoring to make sure that the connection stays up. Now we're going to say -M for what monitoring port. Now it's important to use a high numbered port that's not in use by something. I usually pick something like 10,000, which I know isn't going to be used. And it has to have 10,000 has to be available and 10,001 because it sets up two tunnels, one forward, one reverse, and so it constantly checks the connection. So just pick something that is not in use like 10,000. And then we're going to say -F because we want it to go in the background. And I'm also going to say -N because I want it to be a non-interactive SSH shell. And then I'm going to set up my tunnel, which is going to be the same tunnel as before. Localhost port 80 to CentOS. So I'm going to press enter and it should just disappear. All right, so now it's running in the background. And we come over here. And sure enough, it's running. It's working really good. And if we come over here and something were to happen and, our SSH connection is killed, we come back over here, you don't notice anything because it's just running in the background, keeping that system running. But if we hit refresh, sure enough, it's still up. It's still running. And the cool part is not only will it detect if there's something killed off, like SSH is killed. Let's say this network connection goes down and a half hour later it comes up. Well, if that happens, autossh is going to have those two tunnels that it tries to establish and it will just automatically bring it back up. It's just going to keep trying to get your connection up, and it's going to recognize when things like network issues are causing the problem rather than just SSH itself failing. So autossh is just a better way to establish persistent SSH tunnels. If you want to kill it off, you do something like pkill autossh, and it's going to, kill that thing in the background. Press refresh, unable to connect because we've killed the autossh program running in the background. This isn't the only way to establish a persistent SSH tunnel. We looked at other ways in other nuggets, but autossh is probably the best way if you can install it on your system. If you're using like an embedded system, you may not have the option to install autossh, but if you can install it, I encourage you to use it for those persistent tunnels you want to put in your startup scripts. Remember, it does still require that you set up SSH key pairs though, otherwise it's going to be prompting you for something on boot up that you can't enter because it's not interactive. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.